Meanwhile, we continue to cover President Trump's big Asia trip going on right now. Overnight, he met with Japan's newly elected prime minister and signed a number of trade deals.
As Drew Petromo can tell us, trade deals, especially with China, are the focal point of this trip. Good morning, Drew.
Good morning.
Well, let's start with Japan because that's where the real news was made. And there is a framework. The president's calling it a golden age, this relationship with Japan. So fill us in on that.
Yeah, so if you look back to earlier this year, Japan promised to invest about $500 billion into the U.S. in response for the U.S. Lowering some promised tariffs that the president had threatened to impose. We've been waiting to get more details about how that's going to be filled out. We actually got some news, I think just a little while ago, that the Toyota was going to invest $10 billion into the U.S. So you start to see some of the lines being filled in on this promise to make big investments in the U.S. There's still a lot of ambiguity, though, on how exactly that will play out. The big deal is China, and even in this meeting with Japan, that's been sort of the focus of this. There's been this agreement that's been signed between the U.S. and Japan to try to figure out a way to maximize its use of these rare earth elements. China controls 90% of those elements, so there's 10% still out there. Japan and the U.S. are going to work together to try to maximize the use of that leftover 10%.
Japan's got a new prime minister, Sanai Takaichi. President Trump talked about the relationship between our two countries. Let's listen.
And I look forward to working with you. And on behalf of our country, I want to just let you know, anytime you have any question, any doubt, anything you want, any favors you need, anything I can do to help Japan, we will be there. We are an ally at the strongest level.
What's interesting about Takaichi, she is a protege of Shinzo Abe, and he was prime minister during Trump's first term, and they had a really good relationship. He was tragically assassinated in 2022. So she's kind of using that the fact that she is a protege of the previous prime minister who had a great relationship with President Trump to kind of build on that and keep the relationship between the U.S. and China growing.
All right, well, let's talk about China. Treasury Secretary Bessent was talking about this. He says there's a framework now to work with China on these rare earth minerals and some other topics. And, you know, it behooves both countries to do something because these are the biggest world economies, the United States and China.
Yeah, you know, President Trump a lot of times likes to talk about who holds the cards, but the reality in this case is both China and the U.S. hold some cards here. So the president has been threatening and imposing tariffs on China, and in retaliation, China has imposed restrictions on the importation of soybeans, which has really hurt U.S. farmers. And also, when it comes to these rare earth elements, China has said that they would impose new restrictions on how they are being able to send across the world. And it's very important in manufacturing of advanced technology, everything from cell phones to jets, jet engines. These components are needed for that. So the preliminary discussion is that China would suspend those export restrictions on the rare earth elements for 1 year as a part of this framework of a deal with the U.S.
Let's listen to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent talking about the negotiations with China.
I think we've reached a substantial framework for the two leaders who will meet in Korea next Thursday. So, on the table, the president had given me maximum leverage when he threatened 100% tariffs if the Chinese imposed their rare earth global export controls. So I think we have averted that.
So, Drew, to his point, you mentioned last hour, somewhat seems like the president is sort of cleaning up a mess that he's created, and we're kind of getting back to the baseline of where we were.
Yeah, that's what his critics would say, is that President Trump created this crisis, and now he's kind of dialing it back and maybe fixing a crisis of his own making. But there's a bunch of key issues on the table here. The fentanyl crisis plays into this. Some of the precursor ingredients that are used to make fentanyl come from China. Part of this deal is aimed at limiting some of that, the ability for those precursors to flow to, I think a lot of it is actually made in Mexico and then imported across the border into the U.S. There's also this issue of Taiwan that's hanging out here. That's a big issue for China. It sees it as part of Greater China. The U.S. has long supported its ability to have some independence. I think there's some questions about how exactly President Trump sees the Taiwan situation and whether or not there'll be some kind of easing of the the traditional stance from the United States that Taiwan should maintain its independence, and so it'd be interesting to see just even how that is worded. China watchers and people that are concerned about the security of Taiwan watch every single word that is uttered by leadership in the U.S. for what is the future of that delicate relationship.
Taiwan has said it's not worried, but I'm sure that Taiwan is worried.
Definitely.
Right? Hard to think they wouldn't be. Thank you, Drew.